I'd like some clarity on what information we can expect from WPT and how, I don't want to say miscommunication or misunderstanding, but how this mistake is going to be rectified.
Jennifer McGowan, Legal Counsel to the Board. What I can say is nothing's changed in terms of that is able to be provided to the board. That is governed by state law and the collective bargaining. Spoke to the union. Maybe that's, I'm not sure if that was quoted, but I don't think he would have spoken directly. But the information that is given without violating the individual's confidential personal information. So anything that could be identified and tied to an individual personnel record is not available. So nothing's changed in that regard in terms of.
So then, to clarify, so we have a case recently about this was so to hear that case, would we be able to receive primary accounts such as text messages, emails that are sufficiently anonymized, whether it's done through the time of era Adobe or good old-fashioned whiteout? Would that information be
All the records that are pertinent and are available to go into executive session, there is an exception for that. So that will not change the board's ability to hear the information in those cases.
on it, but we can circle back.
Okay. Yes, sir. As far as the published summaries
For executive session, yes.
for executive session,
Yeah, Jennifer said, we will be providing the information that is pertinent, so. Will be pertinent and what is not pertinent.
so when I provide your executive session summary, I give you all the details that are related to that complaint, as well as the videos, and that is the executive session that you guys have been experiencing with me is, none of that's changed, none of that's changed.
So on the Jensen Hughes dashboard where it says that we will be getting detailed numbers in order, that means that those will happen in executive session, or we won't be needing that piece of the dashboard?
So the Jensen Hughes is a recommendation, legal advice will bound by those bargaining agreements. So even if they make a recommendation that these summaries must be more detailed, unfortunately the bargaining agreement overrules the recommendation of that. In executive session, it's not the same scenario. So that's why on your executive session summaries that I give you, I will put, if it's a write-in complaint, you'll get the write-in complaint. You'll get the quote of this is what the complaint was to professional standards. And then, as I've mentioned, some of the complaints are by phone, which go on for 45 to hours. So I type sentences to quickly abbreviate those instead of playing those in executive session.
So executive session won't change, this is only for the summaries that we receive to determine if we want to go review it later.
Correct.
Thank you.
One clarity from me. Or anything, so we were told that these summaries were kept short of litigation, not. Clarity from you guys. Is it the CBA that overrules limit the summaries, or is it going to be open to ladder in January?
State law.
State law part
Under state law, we have, protection for employees, better privacy with the privacy.
This is also something that exists on our website. It's accessible to the public any time of day. This is a complaint dashboard that we created back in September to attempt to address available timely information related to closed complaints. And so anybody can come on here and see the status of their complaint and any closed complaint. See here, unfortunately this was left out of the article. This wasn't discussed in the article, but you'll see here we have complaints that were closed as recently as March 24th of this year, so 3 days ago. Its summaries publicly available that include language like complaints of an officer unlawfully using force and gender disparaging language. We do try to thread this needle between providing as much information as we possibly can and upholding our obligation as an employer to our employees to maintain the confidentiality of employment records as kind of develop this dashboard with the city manager's office, and this is maintained by Professional Standards Bureau. So we've actually allocated staff in the Professional Standards Bureau to manage just this. Added the techniques to the Bureau to help manage this, to allow more timely available information and to try to expand those summaries, make them as specific as we can, while still maintaining our obligation to our employees to keep employment records confidential. And this is accessible through the Wichita Police website. I can go back and show you how I got here if you'd like to see that. I just want to see it because I'm not sure if all of you are.
Based on the volume of emails that we're getting from the public, I don't think people understand that this exists, that they need to get a closed complaint. That's a bigger question for later, but having this on the citizens report page would go a long way. When we tell people you need a PSP number, back, a CRD link back to this page, the statement stating what it's for would help a lot. And this may be too much of an ask, but something similar to this, where you just have an extra column that says this is reviewed by. Except for this document, we have anything that jumps back.
Actually, we take those things back and discuss them with professional standards. Adding a link to this from the citizens report page, that's pretty easy. I can get that done pretty easily. Adding columns and stuff, I'll certainly discuss that. I'll certainly discuss that with the executive staff. But just so everybody does know how to access, if you go to wichitapolice.com, it'll take you to our main landing page. And on the left-hand side, professional standards. So you click there, and then towards the middle, you have to view open and close complaint information. Click here. It'll take you off the site and to the page. So you can see as complaints come in, they are added to this list. The top list is sorted from the oldest to newest, and the bottom list is sorted from the newest to closed to the longest to go closed. For lack of a better word.
Thank you for sharing this. Well, it is appreciated, and I think maybe what I'm trying to get at more is, given that everybody here signed confidentiality agreements that fully will I respect that you're trying to limit our exposure to more phone calls transcribed on the paper, I do think that for us to be able to gauge which cases full complaint form needs to be made this meeting or to the public, because I understand that there's laws against that. However, part of the settlement is agreed agreed to be confidential, that we can see the complaints ahead of time, so we have a better idea of what we're looking at. When this agenda
Just second that.
or
I think we could clarify that, like, the logistics of how that would happen would have to occur to share further information than what's being provided. So, I don't know how the we would approach that. I guess I'll, for discussion.
Essentially, I mean, what would happen would be we would go to an executive session for every single one of these cases. I would have to research each one of those cases to see what the actual complaint is and produce an executive summary based on that.
Kind of filter through how we might be. Next week.
I don't know if we have much of a choice, since I don't think this can be resolved this week here, but we, I think, needs to be taken back. The end is getting the most raw information from the complainant that we can, so we're not trying to guess what's, conduct by WPD employee meetings. There's a pretty wide spectrum of what that could entail, and something that is rude could also be something much more egregious. And in fact, I don't want that to slip through our cracks. So, I guess that is request that city legal and WPD explore how to best share the complaint form RB in advance of its monthly meetings. Good.
You wanna make a motion to, can I say conform to the, as possible to the Jensen Youth recommendation?
So that's motion to as close as possible.
Yes, we can speak more to the microphone, so we can ensure that everyone meets here.
Okay, look at it again for me so we can make sure we get it clear.
Okay. Gonna do my best. For city legal department and for how to form to Jensen Chief's recommendations to the best of their ability to achieve the end that CRD receives most information possible ahead of its monthly meeting. Again,
It's been,
I heard a motion in a second, so you can have discussion.
discussion. Any comments on that? Yes, sir.
I would like to speak in favor of this, as I'm reading that article. Deadline or something. 2 years ago, and some of those recommendations are still not being met. 2 years is a long gap, and things have to get done in certain time frames. But I think 2 years is a long time frame. That's not to be made, for, and that's a lot of money to spend. Uh, and so I would agree with this, and I would speak in favor of this. I would say that, and I know we don't compare where we don't compete, but I, as a call taker for Sedgwick County 911, have to provide more detail than this for a dispatcher to understand information to get out to an officer. Right? Again, I know those are two different ball fields, and I know we're dealing with information here, but again, this, like Josh mentioned, this isn't really helping me. This tells me nothing, and then I'm coming here having to say, okay, well, let's review a certain. It's time because I don't think that there's it would be difficult to elaborate or expound upon some of these descriptions without breaking confidentiality or diving too deep into reality or people's personal lives or anything like that. I don't think that it would be too difficult to do that.
You give us the name of the author of the article that's being referenced.
Yeah, it's titled of the article. You said details how much can oversight board be told about possible police misconduct. Hold on, it's the phone.
I was just gonna say that was published in, the Wichita Eagle on 3/26, so just yesterday, if you're trying to find it, it was in the court section of the paper.
So, as far as the motion is concerned, it's probably second as well, so we've had discussion. Is there any more discussion we want to have on this particular motion? All in favor? Any opposed to the motion? Opposed? There any other, are there any other comments or anything? Okay. Fantastic. We know you have public comment in this section. I don't want to limit you all, we really want to move on, but if you all, I'm pretty sure you all have a copy of this particular report. If you all, that's something you want to say something
Zach
about,
Kester.
we can give you that moment now. If not, we're going to keep moving. I just didn't want to be fast, allowing the public to
Mark Barlow. I'll make it real quick. I don't know if this is the perfect time to bring this up, but I was in the Citizens Police Academy training 3 or 4 years ago, and at that time, what we were told was that
Yes, that's correct.
2 cases per month
Correct.
to review. Is that still accurate?
to review.
That you're allowed to review. That was
I believe, really that are presented to us.
perfect. My data from back then was what I was waiting to find out on was if that number had gone up. So if you guys have unlimited access, then that's.
Yes, sir. At any time, you can bring, any citizen can bring forth a case, PSP number, and submit it to us, and we can look over it at any time. So, yes, sir, that's the information that we need to get out. That at any time, any citizen can ask us to look over a particular case that has been closed. We will be able to look into it.
Good.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
I have a question. Where did you said you read that in the CPA?
It would have been, I can tell you that I think it was in week 5. So if we can, I've got the wrong book in front of me, but if I looked up what week 5 was, I could give you some more information on that.
No, that's fine. So was it coming from like one? Giving to citizens is also another thing that I want to touch upon tonight because there is misconception from system, maybe even from board members.
When did that law change? Because they issued a bench warrant for me.
So this is kind of public comment, so we're kind of not going to go back and forth. But we've written down, and we take very good notes, and so...
I just want this behavior stopped.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And yeah, this kind of...
Yeah.
There's things that can be said that has to be investigated.
Absolutely.
And just because somebody doesn't believe it, it needs to be investigated.
Do you have a PSB number that you would like the board to review?
That's what I was getting ready to say, was I think that your case is a good example where a citizen could bring forward a closed PSB.
Mine was in May of 2022. Okay. And it was Detective Shell and Jason Bartell who put the bench warrant out for me, yes. After I told them that their police were sex trafficking.
If you could get us a PSB number, we can add it to our agenda.
They never gave me a number.
Okay.
Can the officers help with how you would find a PSB number, or?
I would love to have that.
I'm not sure how you find the information that you're looking for.
And give us the correct spelling of your last name.
F as in Frank, U, S as in Sam, I-L-I-E-R.
And your first name again, I'm sorry?
K-A-R-E-N.
Okay, got it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
And ma'am, I am the secretary for the Citizens Review Board, so at any time that you have a PSB number, or any time that you would like to communicate with us, please email us at crb@wichita.gov, and I will respond to that email.
Can you write it down for
Yes,
me?
ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
I appreciate that. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Do I need to sign this?
No, you're good. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Thank everyone for their comments. We're going to move forward. I see that our city manager has made it and our chief of police have made it, and I know they've been running today, so we want to go ahead and get them in front of us so we can hear what they have for us on today. We are so thankful to have our city manager, Robert Layton, and our chief of police, Chief Sullivan. Yes. Chair.
good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for scheduling us on your agenda. I had been talking to staff about my desire to come and speak to the group, maybe talk a little bit about the history of the CRB, and maybe some observations regarding how maybe we have the mission of the CRB has moved from the original intent, and then talk a little bit about how we can kind of move forward to determine the best way to make sure that we have meaningful community input into police operations.
So you can talk, sorry.
I don't want him to talk, so I'll keep it here for a second. He'll have plenty of time to talk. But let me just talk a little bit about how the CRB was created. When I got here, what we had in place was the City Manager's Review Board, I think it was called. And all that board did was react to complaints that were filed. And I think we may have had some years where there wasn't a complaint filed. Maybe the most I can remember in a year was 2. So we weren't really getting much meaningful feedback from the community through that process. So we looked at what other cities were doing, and we wanted a more robust system that allowed us to get a better connection with the community, which was a concern of mine, and to get meaningful feedback. And so if you go back and look, I was one of the authors of the ordinance, and so if you look at the ordinance, and I'm sure all of you have, there are 6 major responsibilities of the review board, but in the preface, it really does talk about what we had intended, and that is the board is to advise and assist the city of Wichita and its police department in policy development, education, community outreach, and communications related to police-community relations. The board will work to create a dialogue between community representatives and the Wichita Police Department. Primary purpose of the board will be to improve relations between law enforcement and the community and be available to provide community perspective on policy, programs, and priorities of the department. The whole idea was not to have formal meetings. I mean, you have to do that, and you have work to do. The idea was to have an ongoing dialogue, that all of you are here because you represent a segment of the community that's really important to hear, and that we don't necessarily have the same access to residents and their concerns that you do, whether it's because we're city officials or because people don't trust the police department, whatever it is. So I had envisioned that the monthly meetings would be people bringing issues and concerns, as well as the department had the opportunity to bounce ideas, policies, and procedures to an appropriate level by the board. But I wanted that to be this open dialogue that went back and forth. So, and if you look at as you go further in the ordinance, there are actually 6 main responsibilities. It talks about a community outreach, talks about conveying community concerns. It talks about an annual report on racial and bias-based policies and policing. And I have some thoughts about that as well. It talks about it serving as the community advisory board to assist the city of Wichita and its police department in policy development, some of the things that are in the preface. It's to review existing policies, procedures, and practices in the department. And then the last item is the post-discipline findings. My concern is that I think as it has evolved over the last few years, the main focus of the board has been on the review of cases and not as much of the dialogue and the input into the police operations and then police policies that come from your day-to-day presence in the community and what you hear from people. And that's what's so important. And that's why all of you have been appointed, because of your backgrounds and the feeling that whether it's me making appointments or the mayor and council, that you are going to bring that information back, and then you can help us get better. because none of us are perfect, and we want to make sure that the police department and the city of Wichita are trusted by the residents that we serve. So that's the bottom line. You obviously, what's happened, and the reason I wanted to talk to you is because I've watched, let's just call it burnout for whatever reason, lead to significant turnover on this board over a period of time. And a lot of it's because your case volume has become so onerous that after a while people said, I just can't do this anymore. And when you talk about a backlog of 22 cases, the question is, how do those cases get to you? Why are they picked? And what I'd like to do is, I would love for the board to have a discussion on, here's some areas of concern for us. Just say one of it would be bias policing. So we're going to focus on cases that we see where that has been called into question. But it all comes from not just your own personal interest, but what you've heard from the people that you represent. And if they continually say, I'm having problems with that, or use of force or whatever, that's where I would like you to maybe drill down a little deeper. Also, if you have the kind of relationship that I was hoping for, you wouldn't necessarily have to have the motion that you considered tonight. What I would like the board to do is come back to the staff and say, Jensen Hughes said we wanted greater detail, or they recommended greater detail in descriptions. How do we get there and still protect the police officers and their privacy, but in a way that gets you what you need? And it just, maybe it's as you're going through a case in executive session and say, okay, what would you like to see in a description that would have been more helpful to you? And then back and forth through that discussion, we get to a point and say, okay, here's what we hear you say you want in descriptions. But that's all through a dialogue, not the formality of a meeting. And I know you've got to do that in order to keep things moving at times, but it just has strayed a little bit from what not only we had designed, but I think the early Citizen Review Board, when I met with them, we had some pretty robust discussions at times, and they were very clear about things they wanted to see done differently, and we were able to adjust to that. I also would tell you that, we've now since 2022, is that right? Mm-hmm. We've had a new police chief who has a whole different philosophy about policing. And
November of 22.
Yeah, since November, that's right. He doesn't want to get tagged for earlier than that. And I would love you to come alongside him. And a lot of case review is more meaningful to me if it comes from the time he started and the time he started to bring new policies and changes to the department. You can have the right to go back, I think, 5 years under the ordinance, and that's fine, but I'm not sure that is as meaningful to me, or maybe even to you, as the cases that we've had since 22, because he's trying to change the police department in the way and its practices. One example that I'm so proud of in terms of what he's done is the emphasis on de-escalation. And so, which then also ties back to use of force and those kinds of things. This department is significantly different today than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, on how it deals with circumstances where someone is in crisis and is confronting the police department. And we have so many good outcomes that we can point to in the last year or two, especially because of those changes in policy. I'd love you to be able to come alongside the department and say, okay, you've implemented these policies. In the last year, we're seeing some cases where maybe you're not hitting the mark. Let's talk about that. And that's the kind of back and forth that I think could be really could help us get better. So that's kind of my initial thoughts. I do want to get specific, and that is regarding the racial profiling or the racial bias policing. We've got a tremendous asset in this community, Dr. Berzer, Michael Berzer at WSU, and we have contracted with him a couple of times since I've been here to do a racial profiling report for us. He knows it's not about just collecting data. It's the context of the data, and also knowing how the discussions are going nationally, and to allow you and me and the chief to better interpret that data. And if you have a regular study done by him, then we can trend. and look at the trends going forward. So I would support Dr. Berzer doing an annual report on behalf of the CRB and the police department so that we can measure our progress over time and we have a uniform methodology and the right expert to be able to give us that information or data. Then the last thing I have before I turn it over to the chief is that what I'd love for this group to do is take advantage of what we had set up a few years ago and didn't fully implement, and that's the opportunity for a strategic plan. For you to be able to better define what it is that, if this is successful, what does that look like, and then how do we get there? What are the steps necessary to get there? Being mindful of the ordinance and the way it was established and what the original intent was, but you don't have to be confined just to that. And I'm going to recognize that everybody, every CRB that exists in the future will always have its own area of emphasis. And I think the strategic plan should allow that to happen. But it would be nice for us to kind of get on the same page on how we can move this community forward in a way that we've got a great partnership with the police department, but we're also not afraid to call out any issues that the community believes are important. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chief Sullivan.
What he said.
That's the first time he's ever done that.
No, just to touch on a couple points. The last time I was here, I talked about some of the other things that this board has been tasked with, and I've been very, very open with the community that when it comes to recruitment, we are missing the mark on persons of color, and I have asked for help with that. Pastor, you and I talked about this many times. That's why you'll be joining me at Black Wall Street again, because we're doing good with the cultural awareness, but we're not getting the numbers we like. We are ahead of the national average when it comes to women, but we are not meeting our goals when it comes to minorities. And I don't believe in ducking a problem. I'm trying to meet it head on. I will take all the help I can get, the recommendations to get me in front of the right groups of people, and to tell us if you think we're doing something wrong. I think I put together a good team to do recruitment under Captain Lemons, but we're missing the mark. And again, old cases. I came here, that was the first thing I did, was revamped the Professional Standards Bureau, and Captain Bartel has been down here and has given an excellent presentation. I think that by making that a captain position and that captain reporting only to me and no one else, to give them the independence they need, that we have made significant changes in the process. We have gotten consistency, but I don't know that. I know you want to review older cases, and that's your decision, but I cannot take action on older cases, even if you feel that the wrong result happened. Rather, look at the actions that I have taken since I've gotten here in regards to discipline and make recommendations there, comments, criticisms. Yes, de-escalation. We look at body-worn camera every single morning at our executive meeting after our city-wide coordination call, and we look at how successful the training we have given is being utilized on the street, along with the technology that officers have been given, like the Taser 10. And we looked at 2 situations this week where potentially deadly force incidents were resolved with little or no use of force. And I call those officers up personally, whenever that happens, to make sure that I reinforce in them that is recognized and valued by executive staff, because that's how you change culture. But I also say one of the older cases that you looked at, you wanted to see our de-escalation policy, but this is one of my complaints. The good captain over there, this is 5% of his responsibilities. I put a lot on his shoulders. He spent 3 days compiling all the information on de-escalation training, but it was never brought up again. So I just ask you to be thoughtful in that regard. We're happy to provide what you want, but we just hope that there's a purpose for it. I agree. I love Dr. Berzer. We're partnering with him this summer to do an evidence-based policing conference up at WSU. But if we're going to do a study, then we he was very clear in both of his studies that that was very preliminary data, and it was using census data. Census data is the most unreliable form of research data. If you're talking about the driving public, well, you have to be 15 or 16 to get a license to begin with, and at some point you age out, and not all people have a license. So, I mean, that's just one of the many details. You know, we have to do observational studies. We have to do ride-alongs. We have to look at body-worn camera to determine what was the officer's true reason and motive for making the stop. So I would love to do those studies, but we just have to commit to doing them using sound scientific and research principles. And that's really all I have.
I do have one question for you real quick. On that, and listening to your discussion and everything, what this originally was set up for, you know, my feeling is you hear some negativity. Why isn't that positive brought into it?
Oh, are you on our social media?
No, I'm talking about the meetings. Because like I said, we review these cases, we look at this, but I mean, yeah, I can see the social media, but to kind of like maybe have that information also.
Well, I guess my point was that's why we make that publicly available. That's why we started Well Done Wednesday as just the best example I can give you. Because that, when you talk about Jensen Hughes, and that was one of the things that officers said in the Jensen Hughes report, when we do something negative, it's a front page story. Right. When we do something positive, no one ever hears about it again. And that's why every week we put up a video that shows officers putting the ICAT training into place, utilizing the TASER 10 to resolve potentially deadly situation, utilizing their autism awareness kits. So, I mean, that's something that, you know, we can certainly bring a list of those videos, but, I mean, we literally have a difficult time every week deciding on one. And we also try to make sure, like with St. Patrick's Church, that we get our professional staff in there as well, because, you know, our crime scene investigators, our analytical team that gives the officers on the street the information they need to go out and be successful, and I believe that is why violent crime is down in the city this year, and shootings were down in the city last year as well. Property crime is also down significantly, and we have highlighted the Property Crimes Task Force, which is especially significant because that task force is only possible because of the cooperation that we get from our law enforcement partners and the private sector that is providing us with resources that we just don't have in our budget. So I think that's a great idea, and we can certainly have the captain come prepared with examples and videos and things like that to show you that I think would drive home the importance of de-escalation even more than dropping reams of data on you.
That's exactly what I was touching on.
Yeah. When in a previous life, we had a performance measurement program that was citizen-based. I always give this example that if you ask me to determine if we're effective with our snow removal, I'll tell you how much it costs per lane mile, I'll do all that. The people that I work with, their standard was, can I get on my driveway by 7 in the morning? That was, and so what I would love to have is what this group believes are the important ways to judge the effectiveness of the police department. And then what we can do is then we dashboard that, and you can get that on a regular basis. You may say, we want to know, how do we determine if de-escalation is successful or is effective? And then we work with you to determine what that looks like, and that would be one of the things that we would track for you on a regular basis. I want you to be trusted in the community, so I don't expect you to be the PR arm of the city or for the department, but what I would like you to do is talk about good trends and things that are happening that you believe are important to judge the police department. And at the same time, in doing that, you'll recognize, well, this is where I don't think you're hitting the mark. And that makes us better, and it allows you, I think, to have credibility with the public and say, hey, listen, we know we're weak here, and we'll even be willing to do benchmarking against other cities if they collect that kind of information, which is a little harder than it used to be. We used to be with a group of cities that we shared that information, and I could have given it to you a little easier.
Well, we do that through the Major City Chiefs Organization.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
We are an active member. I obviously am a member, but one of the things that I did was I'm just not a member. The Wichita Police Department is represented on every single one of the working groups within Major City Chiefs, so that we're looking at crime, we're looking at intel, our PIO office, so that we are engaged in a national conversation on policing. And we are getting the feedback that we would hope for in terms of our technology, our policy development, and really, especially the use of de-escalation.
Can I ask, I like hearing that in the early days you had robust conversations. Did you follow this same format where you had public agenda? It doesn't really lend to give me your ideas. And I don't know how it was then, but to me, that isn't this format.
Yeah, I think that because they didn't do a lot of cases, they had more time on the agenda for items that were driven by the board members or by the chair. And so that's where I think you had a little bit more of a robust discussion. And there was always a citizen piece to the meetings. So there was always, it never seemed to take a lot of time, but there's usually one or two people who would come, express their issues, and then that, I don't think it usually went more than 10 or 15 minutes, if I remember right, in the early days.
I don't think, are you really recruiting in the high schools? I'm in Southeast High School, where we have a very strong ROTC recruitment. I've never seen a strong law enforcement recruitment. They're not at our, college days, or every college is there always, but I don't see, to me, there's where you
The problem is you have to be 21 to be a police officer in the state of Kansas, so that's a gap. And that's something that I would love to see changed with also to be a community service officer, you still have to be 21. I'd love to see that changed, because that's a very important position in the Wichita Police Department. They do fantastic work out there, and they keep our commissioned officers available. So one of the things that I hope to explore to see if there's a legal way to create a path where we could get you in the department in that type of position. We do a lot with WSU, and some of my wonderful analysts are recent graduates at WSU, and they're just doing groundbreaking work that literally is being recognized from across the country. We just had Dr. Kaplan in, and we're beginning to start the risk-train management as our primary crime-fighting tool, which is the most constitutionally defensible, because it focuses on places and it focuses on environmental conditions that make locations conducive to crime.
So I appreciate you both coming. I've been very outspoken about what I think we should work on. I'm one voice out of all of the people, but every time I brought a complaint forward, I've said I'm going to stick with use of force and racial profiling or bias policing if we see a complaint. So I like your idea of choosing a focus, and I love the idea of having Dr. Berzer. I guess my question is, when it talks about ideas, policies, and procedures, that's the dialogue, or that's the discussion that we should be having. I don't know that this meeting is set up in a way to kind of play off what she's saying for us to be able to have those, because we have legal here. I love Jennifer, but we have legal here. We have it doesn't feel like a discussion. It feels like a very structured board meeting where we have an agenda and we have to stay to it, and we've got to plan in advance. I think that might be, without asking the board to do too much, we have case review, which we know the citizens are asking us. They're coming forward and saying, and then some of us have pulled forward cases. That's one piece. The relationship with the police as far as procedures, policies, and ideas, like the vehicle pursuit policy has been brought up for 6 years. That's a discussion that I'd like to have without saying, well, that's in review, we can't talk about it. If we are looking at not doing a strategic plan and only having Dr. Berzer come in, what do you suggest that we do to shift this meeting for us to be able to have a more robust open discussion to bring in things like, the community comes to me and says, well, I haven't had a community policing officer stay more than 2 months in my neighborhood. How am I supposed to build a relationship? I'd like to talk about that here. Our format doesn't lend to that.
Right. By the way, Faith, I think you misunderstood me. I'm not saying it's Dr. Berzer or a strategic plan, it's both, all right? So, I think it's as simple as that the next agenda, we're hearing a lot about whatever the item is, let's say, maybe it's pursuit policy. We'd love to let you know what we're hearing, meaning you. Here's what we're hearing in the community on pursuit. Now talk to us about your thoughts on that, how you think the policy is evolving. I mean, you don't have to necessarily, Chief, I don't want to speak for you, but I don't know that you necessarily wait until a document is in draft form and we give it to you. That's the easiest way to do it, and you're right, this process, the way it exists today, kind of encourages that. But if it's a matter of board members can feed items for discussion purposes and we just know in advance, then we'll make sure that we have the right people here to be able to hear out what your concerns are, and then you can hear also where the department is heading and what the chief and his command staff, what their philosophies are. And I think that's how we all get smarter, because I'm an amateur when it comes to this. I don't pretend to understand all of the factors that go into the decision making, for instance, on pursuit. Yeah, Joshua.
Thank you both for being here. It sounds to me like we kind of accidentally did this in this meeting, because last meeting you and I requested vehicle pursuits, license plate readers, and immigration be pulled for this meeting, and we have you both here. So I hope that you all will stick around for that discussion if you're able.
Just to go back to the strategic plan then, so the city contracted with a different board to do the beginnings of a strategic plan. Can you kind of tell us like where we are in that process? Will this board be included in it? What does that kind of look like?
Sure. We put it on hold because we were having turnover in the board. I think there was a disagreement among board members about what the next steps would be, and the chair knows the history of that. I think now what we're willing to do is we're willing to bring in the PPMC from Wichita State and have them sit down with you and you outline with them how you want your strategic plan process to look. Everyone's different, and they want, it's got to be useful to you, so they can talk to you about what the normal process would be, but how that's all put together, that's up to all of you to figure out with them.
First off, I'd like to say I appreciate all the city officials that are here today and staff members. We have been looking at developing a strategic plan, and we have a small sub-task force that's been looking at it. So you being here tonight is great to give the history, because that's been a missing component when that task force is met, to understand where it comes from. I would like to address that in one of the recent meetings, and I believe it was one at the library, we have been trying to separate the prior history of the Wichita Police Department to where you are currently. I would like it noted that this task force, when we met, did talk about the new training. There were some complaints and other things, and we addressed that we felt that the training that was currently implemented and the Wichita Police Department had addressed those prior complaints, and so we've been trying to take into account the new changes and policies that have been in place. One of the things we've been trying to work on, or I've been trying to consider, is that the Wichita Police Department presented that the census is not a good way to evaluate the driving data. And looking at that, I've been trying to find what other cities are using or what other metrics you would recommend. Like Chief Sullivan said, he wants good, reliable data to have good, reliable research and statistics. Is there something that you guys would recommend to use rather than the census, or something other cities are using? Because I, as a layperson, haven't been able to figure that out.
Well, I think you just have to look at some of the other studies that were done. I think California Highway Patrol is one. There was another one in New England. You have to use a variety of research methods. That means looking at body-worn camera. You have to know what was the officer's actual intention when he made the car stop. Because in reality, I'll be glad to take anybody out for a ride, and you tell me what car you want me to pull over, and you tell me the sex and race of the person in the car. I defy you. Everybody has smoke windows now. so including the police. So it takes observational studies. We have to determine how many people drive through our city that don't live in our city. So it's well above my level of expertise, and I know that, and we just need to bring in someone like Dr. Berzer, and I'm sure he could speak on it far more informative and eloquently than I can, but I just want to make sure that you can't do it halfway, because there's crime, and that has to be factored in. Poverty has to be factored in. There's a million reasons. And like our department, when we are very supportive of Second Chance Thursday. One of the things that I instituted is warning citations. A manager's not happy with me because we've issued about 2,000 in lieu of tickets in the short time that they've been out there, because we are not a money-making operation, and we're about education. So, we're completely on board. But when I arrived here, and this thing of community policing, the only reason community policing officers have been moved is they've gotten promoted. And I cannot tell them that they cannot take a promotional exam. Other than that, they've stayed, and as we add to the department, we will add back to community policing officers. But I also am very adamant, and I have told the manager this from day one, I am not going to allow this department to become a department that believes that community policing is the responsibility of 10 officers or whatever number in each bureau. It's the responsibility of every member of the department, including myself. Community policing and community relations are two separate things. Community policing is making sure that every member of this department treats every member of this city and every visitor to our city with respect and dignity, and is always there trying to be helpful and trying to provide the best level of service. It's about making sure that our officers have the skills to de-escalate situations, have the technology to de-escalate situations, that we have a disciplinary process in place that is fair to our officers, but also holds them accountable when they do commit a transgression. So, it's a much larger issue, but I'm very supportive of our community policing officers and very grateful for the work that they do, the incredible work that they do, and we look forward to growing that back to where it was. But as I said before, we've seen a significant decrease in homicide and shooting victims. So when I took over a department that was severely understaffed, you have to make some tough decisions. My priority was violent crime and lives. And as we build our department back up, and I'm looking forward to a large class in July, then we can begin to build up those other specialty units.
And so I've heard you both say that you would be supportive of another study by Dr. Berzer from Wichita State University. Who would we connect with, or how would we start that process?
Well, we can do the outreach to Dr. Berzer. We'll have to put together a proposal so that he can submit something in terms of scope of services. But what I think the chief is saying is we don't want to just replicate what was done previously. We want to establish a new benchmark and then go forward from this year on so that you have the same methodology, and let him come back to you again because he's the expert on what it would take to get some meaningful data. And by the way, since this is being recorded, I am not opposed to warning tickets and issuance of those.
Appreciate you making mention of that. We're going to have to invite you to every meeting we have, so the media will come, and maybe more people will be able to virtually attend our meetings. We appreciate that. We appreciate you both coming out and spending time with us. I really appreciate you, Chief and City Manager. You guys are number one in my book. I appreciate you all. Do we have any other questions or comments or concerns?
Of course I do. So one of the things that we go back to a lot, and I think everybody on this board has, and including all of our partners, have expressed frustration on procedures around how we interact with the community. So it could be, and we even had a guest that came up earlier from the public that kind of talked about that communication. So I think the first thing, and I would love to get your opinion, that we need to work on is what does it look like for us to be able to get a more robust back and forth to citizenry about this process, because we have been inundated with emails from the public asking us to do things that are outside of the purview of this board. I don't know where that breakdown in communication is, whether it's someone in the public telling them, whether it's the PD sending them to that to say this is the way you get this, but there's some kind of breakdown, whether it's the page, the flyer, our messaging, how we communicate to the public about what we do. Like, I don't know, have you heard anything? Because that seems to be really frustrating for us on the board. We want to help the community, but...
Right. I think that's part of your strategic planning process, to talk about that, because communication, you'll never do enough in communication, right? We'll always be criticized for not doing enough. So it's going to be more than just social media outreach. And as you know, some of the people that have concerns about communication, it's not the method, it's that they don't think their voice is being heard. And so then that's a different element. And again, that's why we're leaning on you, because you're supposed to be those trusted voices so that you can help translate. And I've learned a long time ago that, and especially in police complaints, it's not one size fits all. And some people, you hear their concern and you go, okay, that sounds legitimate, and you go back and you find out, yeah, maybe we had a weakness. In many cases, it's the person doesn't like what they were told, and maybe we need to do a better job on how we speak about some issues. But we're open to any way we can improve communication. And again, the chief has tried to boost our PIO efforts out of police and get the word out, but I'm not sure that really gets to what you're talking about. And I think that's how can we make you effective voices? Because I was hoping that you would be who people would lean on. And so then it's a matter of letting people know that you're here and what your parameters are, what you can and can't deal with. And if there's some things that aren't in the ordinance that you're really frustrated about in terms of not being able to address, we're more than happy to talk about that. The ordinance has evolved over time. Well, there's a provision in here that allows you to report out on findings if you wish, and that was added after a dialogue like this that I had with the board.
So does that mean you would encourage people to come to this board even if they don't have a closed complaint? Because I think that's been the thing that's been hit over and over is where after it's done, after all the investigation is done, it's closed and they've been told, then you can come to us and we can't really help you, but we can see if there was maybe a process that wasn't handled correctly or a policy that wasn't maybe in line. So would we encourage the public then to just come regardless? Or I think that's where I was getting to. It's like people don't really know when to come or what to tell us.
Yeah, so my dream for this group when we put the ordinance together is that when you are at a community event, people feel comfortable to talk to you about the issues. I don't think that we're going to get anywhere with broad communication in the community if you're expecting them to come and sit in this chair and, they need to know that every month you'll allow time for that. It's them knowing you and being able to talk.
Any other questions, comments, concerns for the chief and our city manager?
One last thing, apologies, Manager, your comment about amending the ordinance tickled something in my brain about the most recent change to the ordinance was in 2023, correct?
Actually, I want to double check. I thought I had it in 22, but I could be wrong. There may have been a 23 amendment.
Yeah. That's okay. Regardless, as I understand.
Yeah, I think it was 22, but anyway, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you both.
Yes.
As I understand it, and I've spoken about yesterday's Wichita Eagle article a couple of times now, it's my understanding that the amendments that were made were the union sued to prevent them from going into effect and wanted them rescinded. Now, I'm union, I understand you're manager, you're the chief and city manager. However, if our goal is an open dialogue, I think that I would just use this space to encourage our unionized police colleagues to participate in that dialogue as well, including changes to the ordinance, should there be future changes. Soapbox there, so.
Yeah. If you're asking, do we want to have ongoing dialogue about how this body will evolve and what's necessary for you to be able to do your job, we're always open to that.
I know you are.
Yeah.
my concern is more for make sure that everybody is committed to that process.
Well, the guardrails that we have are existing laws, and also personnel policies and collective bargaining agreements. And I've always been protective of our employees, regardless of where they work and who they're represented. They have certain rights in terms of privacy. And so I recognize that sometimes that's perceived as being an impediment to getting information, and I don't want to do that. So when I said, how do we get you more information so you feel more comfortable on the descriptions? We do that in a way that we don't violate the privacy agreements that we have with our employees, but also in a way that allows you to be able to make a meaningful finding on a case. And so we can find that middle ground. And I think we're open to that. And ultimately, I can speak for administration. When it comes down to any actual ordinances, that's the mayor and council. And I can make recommendations, you can make recommendations, but ultimately they'll decide where we go. So I can't speak in terms of what ultimate policy will be. But if I remember, most of what we were trying to do in 22 was, I don't know that all of it, I could be wrong, but I thought most of that had to do with some responsibilities of the board more than the privacy piece of it. But anyway.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thank you to our chief and our city manager. It's not on our document, but I don't want to look over our public again. I knew it. Absolutely. If you want to come, I want to make sure I don't limit anyone. So, chief, don't run off. City manager, don't run off. Want to make sure we get everything covered. Come on, Mr. Shazier.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both.
Hello, LaWanda DeShazer, and I am so glad to hear that we're going to follow up on the racial profiling data gathering technique. We've done it a few times, and our question was always, okay, now what? We got the data, now what? And so we're going to invest more money into getting a better system to track that data. I hope there is still a now what. A few years ago, Amazon had funds available to do something, the things that the police chief talked about. You can recognize attitudes, language, body language, to tell if there was any biases in police officers, and we didn't take them up on the offer. And so now it sounds like we're backtracking, we're getting back on the right track, and we're going to really put some meat into this data digging, or there's no point into doing it. So I'm glad to hear that we're taking a broader look at it, and we're going to do some things, and hopefully the now what will come after a better study. So anyway, I just want to tell the police chief and our city manager, thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. Appreciate that. We're going to move forward. Some policy reviews on today. It's already been kind of mentioned, but we want to look at review policy 604, which is our vehicle pursuits. We'll also look at 804 license plate readers, and then also look at the immigration policy on today.
Chair, I just want to, if we can go back to it later after this, that's fine. We didn't take cases. We didn't do a case.
Oh, yeah, we'll go back.
So we can do that after.
Yep, we will.
Captain Aaron Moses, again, the Executive Officer of the Wichita Police Department. I am here because I am directly involved in policy development on all policies. We do a weekly staff policy review, which my staff, through data research and policy, which is actually a new section that was created by Chief Sullivan within a new bureau that I supervise. One of my staff members is responsible for reviewing all policies, managing that process of getting them to the expert within the agency, back in front of executive staff, in front of the collective bargaining unit if necessary, to the law department, back to executive staff, and then published. So it's a lengthy process that goes into drafting policies, and that's all managed out of my shop. So that's why I'm here, and I was involved in the review of 3 of the 4 policies that we have today, so I'm happy to start with wherever you would like to start. I say 3 of the 4, I know you only have 3 on the list, but pursuits and emergency vehicle operations were actually split in July of 2024 into 2 separate policies, 604 and 605. Previously, those were all covered in 604, so that's why I say 4, your agenda says 3.
Let's start at 604 then.
Happy to do it.
Is that good?
That is fine. However, 605, I didn't send 605 to the board, so I don't know if the board has reviewed 605.
Okay.
Until 2 hours before the meeting, because I didn't know it was 605 and 604 had been split. Therefore, I don't know if we'd have enough feedback to offer you for 605 as we would for 604.
Perfect. Let's start with 604. Happy to hear questions, comments, concerns. I'll open it up to you all for the dialogue. How about that? Or I can give you some history on how this policy was developed, whatever you'd like.
What would you like to hear? The history? A brief history?
Very brief.
All right, Cap.
So when Chief Sullivan arrived, one of his priorities was the pursuit policy. As you all know, we're also pursuing accreditation with the state through the Kansas Law Enforcement Accreditation Program. I guess you may not all know that, but we are. First time that the Wichita Police Department has pursued accreditation in our history. Captain Jason Stevens initially drafted this policy. He's our Central Bureau Commander. You have heard from him before. He oversees our traffic section, so that's why he revised this policy. The initial draft was completed probably about October of 2023, came to me to add accreditation standards and get in front of executive staff, along with Captain Stevens. We went through this policy many times between October of 2023 and July of 2024 when it was published. You'll see in the policy, like right on the front page, under authority to initiate a pursuit, when you see KLEAP 8.2.2B, that is an accreditation standard. So that is required for us to include in our policy in order to become an accredited agency. So anywhere you see that in the policy, that's an accreditation standard that we have to include. Other than that, we did benchmark ourselves against people across the region and country, looking at their policies, incorporating language from their policy that we liked, and excluding language that we didn't think was appropriate to include in our policy. And that is kind of how we got to the policy as it is today. A brief history.
Cool.
So I guess my first question would be around the warrants, because we have, based on the warrant, we have information about where they live, their last known, we have flock camera to track them. Is a vehicle pursuit, is the benchmarks there that we have to pursue if there's a warrant?
We don't have to, but I think the public has told us that they expect us to arrest violent criminals. And the warrants we're talking about are violent criminal arrest warrants. They're not property crimes or theft. They're not misdemeanor crimes generally, or ever, right? It has to fall into that category above, warrants for those things. So it's not all warrants, and we do take into account, do we know who this person is? Do we know where they're going to be? And in fact, one metric that we look at, we talk about data, between 2023 and 2024, we saw an astronomical increase after this policy was instituted of officers terminating their own pursuits because of information just like that. They know who they're looking for. It went from something like 38 in 2023 to 150 in 2024. Officers terminating their own pursuits, not waiting for a supervisor to do it because of that, because we made it clear to them, if you know who this person is, if you know where they live, if you have other means of taking them into custody, use those. And that's actually in the policy verbatim. Alternative apprehension methods should be considered to avoid pursuits due to extreme danger present in such activity. That's right in the policy section of the policy. So yeah, we took that into account, but we believe and we have heard from the community that they expect us to apprehend people with violent criminal warrants. So we tried to balance that.
And then,
as best we could.
Sorry, and can you talk a little bit about the asterisks under burglary? Because I'm trying to understand the purpose of this, because it's a pretty lengthy paragraph. It's basically everything that you just said, weighing, they'll terminate and all of that, but so does that mean, I don't know, burglary. It just feels like that's not violent enough to warrant being on that list.
I think people who've had their homes broken into and things stolen from their home would disagree with you, but we did struggle with that, and that's why the asterisk exists. So initially, it said aggravated burglary only. So for those of you who don't know the criminal statute, aggravated burglary would be when someone is present in the structure that you break into. That makes it an aggravated burglary, which is a higher level person felony versus burglary. So what we did is we worked closely with the law department, outside counsel on this. We looked at what other people do, and we tried to strike that balance. And that's why that asterisk exists on burglary, because we wanted to make it clear to our officers, burglary is different than aggravated burglary, and you should pursue differently for burglary than you do for aggravated burglary because of that elevated nature of an aggravated burglary. But we believe there are burglaries that can occur, let's say, kind of an extreme example, but we have, military locations in our city that house very important things. And let's say that there's a burglary that occurs at one of those locations. Not an aggravated burglary, no one's there, but a burglary. I would think that's something the community would expect us to pursue someone for. So we tried, again, to strike that balance and call out to our employees in this policy, there is a difference.
Can I ask, when you say the community, where is that data coming from? Calls to the WPD? Or if you're saying the people want that, where is that?
Feedback. We receive feedback many different ways. We receive feedback through district advisory boards. We receive feedback through community policing officers. We receive feedback directly from people in the community. I live in this community.
So is it all being tallied somewhere? Or
it's not being tallied.
It's just word of mouth?
It's just word of mouth. We hear things obviously on social media. We hear things in public forums like this, and we take all of that into account as we develop policy. And that's something, again, that I think the chief and the city manager have made clear that we would rely on you all to help us understand what the community wants as well, so we can factor that into our discussions.
Can you say that statistic again, how many self-terminating? I think that was a good statistic, because we hear about the poor people that are involved in these crashes, and that's what makes the news, and that's what we hear about in being on this board, but I think that might be a good statistic, and I would like to hear that again.
Let me pull it up for you. It was in a presentation that we just put together.
Because that was my first concern before I was even on this board, when I brought up the pursuit policy, is making sure that civilians are not harmed in the course of, trying to make sure that we keep our community safe.
Absolutely. And we are also tracking suspect vehicle collisions, and those have decreased. So in 2023, we had 58 suspect vehicle collisions during a pursuit. In 2024, we had 30. In 2023, there were 21 pursuits that were terminated at the officer level, so the officer who was engaged in the pursuit. In 2024, there were 150.
Wow. Well, that's good.
All right. And I will add to that, too, something we're really proud of, and it's actually an accreditation standard, but we now do multiple layers of review on pursuits. And we were doing that prior to implementing the accreditation standard. So I've heard many times in these meetings previously, people were asking about coaching and mentoring related to, or some discipline, verbal counseling, whatever, related to pursuits. That was a conscious effort on our part to look at not just the pursuit, but what we call ghost pursuits. It's a term that's used around the country related to officers responding to the area of a pursuit and the tactics they use, whether they're safe or not. So Captain Jason Stevens, one of his responsibilities, as is outlined in this policy, is actually an additional review of all pursuits in our city outside of the original review. So every pursuit is reviewed through the officer's chain of command, the original supervisor that monitored the pursuit, then their watch commander, and it also goes into the early intervention system now. That's something that Chief Sullivan actually implemented prior to him being here. That was removed from previous leadership out of the early intervention system. He added that back in. That's a system of basically if an officer is involved in a certain number of pursuits within a certain amount of time, it flags it for us and says, hey, you've got an officer who's engaging in more pursuits than we'd like. We need to look at that and see if there's any training we need to do or any corrective action. So Chief Sullivan actually brought that back. And then Captain Stevens does a review completely separate of that and looks at videos of officers responding to the area,
We've been able to take corrective action on that as well, providing additional training to our employees to say, hey, you don't need to drive like that to get to the area of a pursuit. And we've actually contemplated that in the policy as well, where we've restricted that the driving of officers responding to pursuits.
On number 6, it says the controlling supervisor shall not become actively involved in the pursuit. When you say actively involved, do you mean like in a vehicle chasing versus actively providing information to the officer?
Actively involved would be one of the pursuing units. So you'll see in the policy, we define the roles of the officers involved. And we have the primary pursuit unit and then the secondary pursuit unit. So what we're saying is the controlling supervisor, the one monitoring the pursuit, cannot be a primary pursuit unit or a secondary pursuit unit. They cannot actively be chasing someone.
And that's to provide more of an overview of what's going on and provide them moments to think about what they need?
Well, so if I've been in a pursuit, it's high adrenaline. Things are happening very quickly right in front of you. And so as a supervisor, that's not the best place to manage what's happening. The best place to manage what's happening is from somewhere in the area where you're listening to what's happening, and you can make sound judgment with all of the information. It's easy when you're engaged in the pursuit to get that tunnel vision of what's happening right in front of you. And it's much more difficult to become distracted when you're not engaged in that pursuit.
And I just wanted to say that I appreciate that you guys thought about that and allowed the opportunity for somebody to pursue or think about the data, not in the moment driving and the there's adrenaline no matter what, but the increased adrenaline of being pursuing. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I don't recall the previous policy limiting it to 2 pursuit vehicles only. That's a new addition, correct?
It did limit the number of pursuit vehicles. We just made it much clearer in this policy.
Thank you. I appreciate that because I think multiple vehicles, and you also clarify in this policy about people coming in, what you do across honestly, I think this is a much better policy.
Good policy. Thank you.
Hopefully it makes the community feel more comfortable.
I think it's important to relate the amount of time and attention that we put on this. That's why I told you we started in October and we ended in July. And there were multiple hour-long meetings in between there where we went back to the drawing board and found better ways to write things, and I think we landed on a very balanced policy.
Yeah.
Nothing's ever perfect, so we are making adjustments. I guess I should say we're not saying this is the end-all be-all, right? If we see things happening, that's part of the review that Captain Stevens does, is to identify where we have gaps in our policy so that we can go back and adjust those. And we can do those at any time. I also want to make that clear that if there are suggestions or the input you have about policy, you can give those at any time, and we can always go back and edit a policy.
Right.
I just thought of something that the community has brought up at our neighborhood meetings, motorcycles and pursuit, because it wouldn't really be, like, it's speeding, so it's not worth pursuing. I think that's what the officer told us. I think there's just been some concern, and also we live right by Kellogg, so there's the motorcycles doing like 150 on Kellogg. So I know that that's not part of this policy, because I don't know that you would chase them. I guess I would ask what policy would that fall under?
None specifically. Are you talking about speed enforcement of the motorcycles, or are officers involved in a pursuit while on a motorcycle?
I was told that if there are high-speed motorcycles, officers will not pursue because it's not safe to try to catch one of those motorcycles. So even if they were involved in something, does that mean motorcycles are exempt from this? Or I guess I'm trying to understand how I would answer this question at a neighborhood meeting when someone asks, well, how come they're not going to chase motorcycles?
I think it's important to draw the distinction between pursuit and an attempt to stop.
Okay.
Right? We will attempt to stop a speeding motorcycle sometimes, if we can, right? But we're not going to pursue that motorcycle for speeding. Okay. Does that make sense? There is a distinction.
Yes, thank you.
A pursuit doesn't begin by law until you activate your overhead lights and activate your siren and someone fails to stop. So that is what triggers what we call a pursuit by law. Attempting to catch up to a violator is not a pursuit.
I will use that terminology, thank you.
All right. Anything else on 604? We just taking recommendations, just kind of listening today. Let's move to 804. Can we do that?
All right, happy to talk about 804. I know you also had 514, arrest and detention of foreign nationals on your list. So happy to do either one.
Sure, I'm so sorry. I have a family commitment that actually I was supposed to get to a while ago. I really appreciate, first, I want all of you to know how much I appreciate you giving the time for this and the fact that you're committed to making us better. And anytime you need me at a meeting, let me know. I'll try to periodically drop in anyway, but if you need my presence, I'll be here.
Thank you, Brother Manager. Appreciate you, sir. No speeding.
I'm happy to speak about either, whichever is of more interest to the board. I know you've been asking about LPRs for a while. I also know that arrest and detention of foreign nationals is very topical right now, so happy to talk about either one.
Honestly, if I could ask that we pick one, because either we're going to have to vote to extend the meeting, or we can ask them to come back and talk about Flocker.
I would request 804 because I did not know that immigration was going to be on this agenda until it was sent a few days ago, and I would love more time to review 514.
Okay.
With 804? Let's stick with 804.
So happy to hear any feedback, questions, or concerns. I have not been involved in the review or update of this policy. It was last reviewed in March of 2020, last revised in March of 2022. As we work towards our real-time information center coming online, I anticipate that we will review and update this policy in line with that. So happy to take any feedback you have.
I mean, I guess I did have some questions. Throughout the policy, it references LSAG, or whatever acronym you use, LPRs. Are those being phased out in favor of the flock LPRs, or will those be working together?
They are separate systems, so they don't communicate with each other at all. They operate completely independent of each other.
Right.
LSAG was sort of the first iteration of license plate reader. We had some physical LSAGs up in locations in the city, and those have slowly sort of been phased out. We do still, if you see a police car driving around with the license plate readers on the top of the vehicle, there's 4 of them, they point in different directions. Those are the LSAG devices. There's no real ongoing operational cost to those for us, so we will likely keep those until they don't function anymore. But those, most of our people don't actually have a log-on for that system, so generally that's providing information directly to the officer who's driving that vehicle as they are scanning license plates. So they function separately and they don't communicate to each other. So long way to answer your question is likely yes, those will be phased out for flock and other technology.
Perfect, thank you. So I noted in the policy that it says LPR data collected or retained by WPD will not be sold, exchanged, disclosed, disseminated, et cetera, for, selling it for, I think money was the thing that it mentioned, but just being sold in general. Do we know if Flock has similar protections for the data that they store, or is that just a policy that WPD has?
No, we actually have a MOU with Flock that we strengthened in the last 12 months, actually, to make it even more clear that the data collected by Flock LPRs belongs to the Wichita Police Department, not Flock, and they cannot sell, distribute, disclose any of it because it doesn't belong to them.
Perfect, thank you. I know that's been a concern, especially with the gunshot detection devices that are coming up, which I think brings me to my third question, which is perhaps, I know that the gunshot detection policy is still in review, in process, and so with your insights in drafting this policy, how will those interact with one another, the license plate readers and the gunshot detection? How will, I guess, officers use them together?
Yeah, so the policies themselves won't likely interact much. We will keep many of the same protections, right? We are very interested in protecting the privacy of our community and making sure that no information is sold, distributed, and so on. But the systems functions separately, for lack of a better term. So I don't want that to be misconstrued. The Flock website that our officers access will be the same website that they access for gunshot detection. That will all live in the same place. But the systems don't necessarily work together. Our officers can take, okay, there was a gunshot detection alert here. Let's look at the license plate readers in the area and see, if we have a suspect vehicle description related to those gunshots, if there was a vehicle leaving the area in a certain direction. But they will be separate policies, and the policies themselves likely won't interact a lot, if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think so. Do you have a timeline for that? I know that I attended a community meeting hosted by our chair a few months ago about...
Within 30 days, that will go back out to the public, as promised at the original community meeting.
Perfect. Look forward to reviewing that. The examples that Vincent brought up, the Keachai and Sedgwick officers that were penalized for misusing the flock policies, was there, one of them was decertified, I forget what happened to the other one. Was that pursued by WPD, or how was that, penalty? How did we, one, uncover that they had misused it, and how was that penalty then pursued?
Yeah, so we uncovered it through citizen reports. We've made our review and audit process much more robust since then. And we've also, Chief Sullivan has taken a very strict stance on this, that if your agency misuses data, you will not have access to it likely ever again. We receive requests from agencies to have access to our data, and he's made it very clear that if you and your employees have violated our expectation once, then that's one time too many. We've also worked with Flock to have positive acknowledgement from each agency that has access to our system that says you will have audit processes in place that mirror ours, and you will have policies in place that mirror ours in order to have access to our data. As far as decertification, that's not something the Wichita Police Department does. That's a function of the Kansas Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training, which I happen to be a commissioner of. But that is a separate function managed at the state level. We did pursue criminal charges in at least one of those cases since Chief Sullivan arrived. He made it very clear that that's unacceptable, and he wanted to pursue that to the fullest extent of the law and present a case to DA Bennett on that.
Real quick, I don't want to limit anyone. I know Junior has to leave. I think he wanted to suggest a case before he left. Sorry, Cap, can we just pause just for a moment?
Absolutely.
I want him to be able to share what he wanted to share before he left.
Yes, I do apologize. I do have to leave. I did want to, and you can vote on this when you get to it, but I wanted to add to the agenda, not for next meeting, because next meeting we're reviewing cases, so in the May meeting, to review 24 PSB 5249. If you have trouble finding it, it's the lengthy one.
5249?
5249. Which is the complaint of a hostile work environment and discrimination by officers. I wanted to review that for multiple reasons. Not only is it an internal investigation with only 5 of the 13 being sustained and the rest being not sustained, but it also, with vague descriptions, I don't know how many officers are involved. I don't know what a hostile work environment entails or what all this entails. So I would just like to look at this a little bit further to understand this better. And that is my suggestion. Thank you, and I apologize for interrupting your time.
Not a problem. It's your meeting, not mine, so.
Is it all right if we stay like 15 more minutes, you guys, so we can finish this discussion?
I'm good with that.
Faith is going to take the meeting over for the last 15 minutes then. No, it's church day for me, y'all. Pastor Harris not at church, like, I get penalized for that. I'm just kidding. I'll stay a few more minutes, but I do have to go as well. So, but let's try to knock this out. I absolutely understand.
So back to the audits, and I appreciate one of the citizens coming forward and kind of talking about the concern around that. Without naming names, obviously, it says periodic random audits will be conducted by LPR administrators to ensure and evaluate compliance with system requirements and the provisions of this policy and applicable law. Who are those administrators, and which, are you talking about state law?
Yeah, so obviously like privacy protection or like stalking in the case of...
Constitutional protections,
Yeah.
okay.
And then the LPR administrator is a lieutenant who works in our real-time, who is helping with the real-time information
Okay.
center.
And so what is that, because you said it was a citizen report, not the audit process that kind of caught these, and that you've corrected that? Is that...
So the audit is pulled, and the cases are reviewed off that audit to ensure that the reason that the officer or detective or sergeant, whoever, the employee, is stating for their search. So per policy, when you search for a license plate in Flock, you have to state a reason, and that reason is a case number, if available, or if you're responding to like a robbery or a shooting, and there is no case number available yet, but there's a vehicle description or something like that, and there's a camera in the area, then you can put robbery 3100 East Central, something specific enough that we can tie it to an incident. So as they're doing that audit, they can go back and check and make sure that ties to an incident.
So not doing your documentation correctly could trigger an audit?
Should.
Okay.
And has. I mean, I as a supervisor have, basically what happens is if they do that audit and they identify deficiencies, that's referred out as an inquiry, which could lead to an investigation, which could lead to discipline.
Okay, and it would be like failure to follow policy 804 or whatever?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Any other comments or recommendations on license plate reader policy 804?
I did have one last one if nobody else wants to go, because I recognize I had a lot of questions about this one.
It's all good.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Part of my inspiration in pulling this is, so folks might know, I come from a background in reproductive health rights and justice, especially in abortion access. And so I think this is perhaps a recommendation or suggestion. I was comforted hearing about all the protections for external agencies. I think that as a part of that, making it explicit that especially for an out-of-state external agency, that the crime for which a request is made is a crime that is recognized by the state of Kansas. And I say that because we're not too far off from a situation in which the Texas Attorney General says, hey, Miss So-and-so had an abortion in Wichita, Kansas, and her boyfriend is suing her under 2023's SB 8, and now we want to get that data to prove that she was in Wichita. And so I think that guardrail, I didn't quite see. I could see where it could be. I don't think I quite saw it. So that would be my one suggestion after hearing everything today.
Maybe I can offer you some comfort in a different policy. So our unmanned aerial system policy, our drone policy, Chief Sullivan is a very forward-thinking individual and actually brought that up while we reviewed that policy, and there is a line in there that says, at no time shall drones be deployed for the sole purpose of monitoring any medical facility without a call for service or specific public safety concern. So I don't think there would be an issue with taking that language and applying it here in a different way, obviously, because that is referencing, flying a drone over a medical facility. But I think there could be an application of that if executive staff wish. So that's definitely something I can take back to them. It's something that we've considered in other policies as we've been developing them.
I like that language, and I would appreciate that, not only in license plate readers, but other applicable where there's a surveillance technology or some sort of device where this data could be relayed to someone's location. Yes, I would greatly appreciate that. Thank you.
Anything else? Great. Did you have? It looked like you were going to ask a question.
No, I was...
You're welcome to.
No, go ahead, yeah. No, it's okay. I resolved it in my own head.
Okay. All right.
So just to be clear, the language that he's talking about, that is something that you're interested in adding to this, so it couldn't be, oh, Faith was at Wesley doing something, and then she drove to Texas. Like, they couldn't ask you for that because it doesn't violate Kansas law. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is I'll take it back to executive staff, and we'll work through it and figure out a way to to address the concern. But what I'm also saying to try to alleviate some of that concern is it's something we've already contemplated in other policies because it is top of mind for us here.
I think the public would be behind that, so thank you.
May I ask, is that's because that's becoming an issue? You are getting...
We included that language because we saw other departments across the country
having to deal with
contemplating that in their policies, and we do benchmark ourselves against other places in the country. Chief Sullivan does it every morning at around 6 o'clock in the morning and sends me many things to read. It's usually my alarm clock. So we constantly look at what other people are doing and see if there's an application to our community and ways that we can enhance our policies to match best practice across the country. Good. Which is why we're a member of Major City Chiefs Association. That's why we actively work with the Police Executive Research Forum. That's why we work with the IACP. That's why we're seeking accreditation, is because we take that very seriously. This leadership team is very focused on making sure that we are aligned with what's happening across the country, because we are one of the top 50 biggest cities in the country. And Chief Sullivan reminds people of that all the time, and we should be the model for the state of Kansas on forward-thinking policies that address some of these things.
Great. Cap, we would love for you to come back at a future meeting, and I'm talking like very near future meeting, to talk to us about the immigration policy. Is that something that we can get on your schedule?
Just a note on that, do we need to review 605 then also, since we only reviewed 604?
We will.
605 is much shorter, I'll have you know. It's 3 whole pages, okay. So that one shouldn't take near as much time.
Okay, so you do those two at the same time?
I'll talk to Captain Cooley, figure out when your next meeting is, make sure it aligns with my schedule, and I'm sure we can coordinate something.
Thank you. Anything else? Thank you, sir. Before we adjourn, board members, let's take a look at those cases and see if there's any cases that we want to look at for review. We already have 24 PSB 5249. Are there any other cases that you all would like for us to review? We have 24 PSB 5249.
Can we, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Can we do 25 PSB 0096? It's an external investigation. I don't know that we've done one of those. And I'm also interested in the racial profiling and to get more data to go along with the Dr. Berger stuff we're talking about. Thank you.
Fantastic.
And I was already going to ask for that one, and I was going to ask the one that Greg did, and so I appreciate you guys asking for that. I would also like to add 25 PSB 0656, since it pertains to the discussion that we just had.
Fantastic. 24 PSB 5249, 25 PSB 0096, 25 PSB 0656. Are there any others? 0096, 25 PSB 0096, 25 PSB 0656, and 24 PSB 5249.
And just to clarify, are those for the May meeting? Is that what we're...
No, we just want to get them on the list.
Okay, got it.
Yes, ma'am.
Actually, Captain Cooley, if this is possible for us to have at the next meeting with the new cases on there, I think this would answer a lot of questions about where we are and what we're doing. And I will just make the request that if you only include the ones that have not been reviewed, or at least push them all to the bottom so we don't have to print out as many, because I can keep that every time. But that way, when the subcommittee's ready to meet, we have the list of what's been pulled, and we can have Odell put that on the agenda for future meetings. So do we need to schedule the ones we want for the May meeting, or are we good for that? Or April, do we have that? I think that's in the minutes, actually.
Yeah, I think we're good. Yep. We're good there.
Okay, then we already have our whole meeting. Great.
All right, yep, April's already set. With that being in mind, our April meeting will be April 27th. Prospective date, April 27th, 2025, 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. We'll be back at the Advanced Learning Library in Room C, located at 711 West 2nd Street here in Wichita, Kansas. Is everybody able to make it on the 27th? Is that a good date?
That's a Sunday.
Oh, so that's the wrong date? 24th?
Yeah.
My apologies.
I can make it on the 27th.
I can make it on the 27th, but you wouldn't like me to be there.
Is it back at the library?
Yes.
Okay.
We're back at the, so it's 24th.
I don't know that I'll be able to make that. We're doing strategic planning. Assume we'll be done by 5, but I
Yeah.
cannot guarantee.
Okay. Anybody else have any conflicts with the 24th, April 24th? My apologies.
I just won't be able to stay over on that day.
Yeah, we'll try to stay close to time, okay?
And has that person already been invited to the April meeting?
I believe so. Yes, sir.
The person for all the cases in
that we're going to
April?
review.
Was it Jake?
Oh, and did we find out if we'll be able to review all those cases? Okay, so all of them can be reviewed, all right.
Okay.
That's covered from last month then, awesome.
So we're good. April 24th, 2025 at the library, 5 to 7 p.m. And if there be nothing else, motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second, all in favor? Aye. Ayes have it.
We went 10 minutes over, that's pretty good.
We fought a good fight.